Welcome, panelists, and welcome everybody in the audience to our panel on search funds, false promise or most direct route to one's own company. Our first panelist will be Andy Love, who will talk to us about raising the fund, finding the opportunity, and negotiating with sellers and capital sources. Andy?
Thank you, Irv, and thanks to the CES for hosting this and for inviting me here today. Delighted to be here and look forward to the opportunity to share a little bit of our experience with you. At the same time, I probably should note that, it's our experience, and although we think some of the things here are axioms, they may not hold true for everybody. And as always, they're worth what you're paying for them. Irv asked me to address the following topics: raising the fund, searching for the right opportunity, negotiating with sellers, and negotiating with sources of financing. It's just a quick prelude, a little background on us. My business partner, Jim Drought, and I graduated from the GSB in 2003 and raised a search fund immediately thereafter. We really began the planning process in the winter break of our second year and put quite a bit of effort into that, and I'll speak to that briefly. We came very close to purchasing several companies in the first 18 to 24 months of our pursuit, and by very close I mean had under letter or significantly negotiated, letter of intent. And with one exception, the opportunity that we're running today, those all obviously unwound. We currently manage operations. We have a business in the behavioral healthcare services arena. We manage operations in a few different states, mainly Texas and the Southeast. And with that, I'll turn to sort of the fundraising and at least our takeaways on that. I think in general, our fundraising process went very well. And I think it was a little bit different than many in the sense that at least for the first few months, we couldn't really devote our full time and effort to it because I was finishing up, in large part because I was finishing up a second degree here at Stanford. So it was heavily a, kind of nights and weekends kind of thing, which really forced us to be very disciplined about what we did and make the most of our time. And I think that's a takeaway that is probably trite and self-evident, but that really applies to everyone. In that regard, our fundraise really encompassed probably 5 to 6 months, but again, the first few were very bursty. And I think the more sort of relevant metric for us would be our hit rate, which was materially better than we thought it would be. And again, I think that's not because of unbridled genius or charisma, which anybody who knows us will dismiss out of hand. But really just to the fact that we did a lot of work. We put a lot of time and effort into the planning, and I think that accrued a lot of dividends, which is really the first takeaway for me. And again, it might sound a little self-evident, but take the planning process seriously and really do your homework. Your enthusiasm for what you're selling should speak for itself, and hopefully others will find it infectious. But enthusiasm and hope are not a strategy. Take the time up front to plan and refine your strategy and your pitch. What does this mean? Number one, know what you're selling. Front to back, up and down. Fundraising for a search fund is a pretty unique proposition. You're asking folks to simultaneously invest in you and your business partner if you have a team. Although you've never done this before, and although in many cases they might have only met you, 5 minutes previously. You're asking them to invest in a specialized and somewhat obscure model for approaching micro-cap buyouts. And you're really also presenting sort of a theoretical company and a theoretical industry and a construct, really both of which have yet to be determined. That almost sounds ludicrous prima facie when you think about it. But, I think how you answer those or how you address them is obviously, number one, know exactly why you want to run a search fund and what you want to do and what you want to get out of it, and sell that enthusiasm. And to that end, we would, our opinion is doing it as a partnership makes all the sense in the world. You're going to see fire and rain doing this, and invariably, one of you is going to be on a sine, sine wave, and the other one's going to be on a cosine, and you're going to need the other person to balance you out and keep you going when you have the bad days, because you will have them. Certainly, 2 sets of eyeballs and all that kind of stuff are very important, and I think that the evidence that Irv and the CES have compiled would bear that out. As to the model, again, there's an enormous body of evidence or research here on the search fund model. Leverage that and make it available, and don't be afraid to sell it. And as to the company and selling the industry, I don't think anyone really expects you to go buy a company in the industry or 2 or 3 industries that you might discuss when you meet with folks. Although in our case, in one of the industries that we discussed, 2 search funds subsequently did get into it in the next 18 months. But do your homework and find some genuinely attractive opportunities. That's what you're going to be doing at the end of the day. And, if you can't sell that then, maybe you should question what you're doing. So in the end, the search fund model is a legitimate tested vehicle, at least in our opinion, and an attractive alternative asset for many investors. But it does have its own risk profile and is uniquely binary in many ways. So be able to quote chapter and verse on the good, the bad, and the ugly of the search fund and how you and your partner will manage it and really make the intangible tangible when you're fundraising. Secondly, know your audience. Know who you want to pitch. And why they might be interested. Obviously, you're going to want to boil the ocean on your network and sort the candidates, by the probability of success that you might attribute to them, but then prepare to be pretty surprised. Consider the types of folks that you want to solicit and why. In our case, we expressly wanted to go directly to individuals, angel investors. We, by design, did not want to approach institutions or professional investors. And the reasons for that were, a perception on our part of sort of less flexibility with them. They're harder negotiators. They have a different set of criteria, timelines, and so forth. The reality for us is that when it all panned out at the end, we did bring a couple of decidedly professional investors on board, Lew among them, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to us. So, think about what you want and why, but also be open to alternatives. As so many people have said in these panels, build momentum early. And I think that the best way to do that is starting with people you know. When we began our fundraising, we defaulted into the thinking that we would go discuss folks, particularly here in the Bay Area, that knew the model because it was there was some ease of logistics, number one, and we wouldn't be selling the concept. Thanks to a particularly sage bit of advice from Jim Ellis, we went and we approached people that we knew. It's a lot more difficult to sell people who don't know you, on a model they know than it is to sell people who know you on a model that makes sense. And evidence of, the folks who know you goes a long way in bringing folks on board who don't. And really, part of that is create a sense of legitimate scarcity and urgency on the part of your investors. Early momentum is key. And finally, test yourself. We called 25 of our GSB classmates into a classroom on 2 Saturdays over 2 or 3 weeks when we were here, and pitched them with the express purpose of getting their feedback. And I don't know whether they participated because we offered them free beer or if it was because we gave them the opportunity to beat us up, but they did participate, and we got some phenomenal feedback. So, again, it sounds trite, but, got to do it right. Finally, there are just some general points that there's always, I guess, routinely mentioned by others that we would absolutely endorse. Don't settle for no. Be persistent and at least get a referral. All meetings are valuable. Doors open from unexpected sources. And finally, ask for the order. As to searching for the right opportunity, the search fund model is again heavily codified. I mean, it's thanks in large part to Irv and to the CES. And I suppose it's called a model because, in large part it works. There are a lot of criteria that have been discussed as to what sort of, comprises the ideal company or the ideal industry. Scrutinize those and really discern what makes the most sense for you and why. For us, it was recurring revenue, high EBITDA margins, low recurring CapEx, and industry growth, even if that just meant modest growth, really coming from the perspective that a rising tide lifts all boats, and a lot of those things would give us a lot of cushion and error room. Questions you'll obviously want to ask yourself are what kind of a search, geographic orientation or not. Being geographically focused can have a lot of advantages. You're closer to the fire. You can get out there and shake the bushes, but you're really limiting your option set. We went with a national search and really felt like that was the right thing for us. Whether to pursue a top-down or an industry approach versus a maybe more opportunistic or intermediated or criteria-driven approach. Again, for us, we felt like that we needed to do both because they came with different sets of opportunities and pros and cons. Ferreting out your own opportunities in a top-down fashion really generates a lot of credibility with sellers when you're meeting with them, and you really know the industry in a manner that you don't when you're looking at brokered deal flow. On the flip side, sellers can be much more qualified. Obviously, if you're looking at represented deal flow, they've engaged somebody to sell the company. So, I don't know. I think there's sometimes a false dichotomy made between those two options, and at least for us, we felt like we had to do both, and we did. At the end of the day, it's a numbers game. Get as many irons in the fire, cast as many nets, and really figure out what you want and why. Go after it. Finally, just differentiate yourself. There's a ton of money chasing deals out there. Private equity firms, strategic buyers. So the competition for deals, even at the lower end, things that most private equity firms wouldn't have sniffed, 5 or 10 years ago, the competition's pretty fierce. And really the most effective way, in our opinion, to differentiate yourself and gain some credibility is to know the ins and outs of the seller's business and to know the industry. And getting them to really recognize you as somebody more like them as opposed to, professional investor or XYZ private equity firm. Briefly moving on to negotiating with sellers, we found a number of things to be true. The single greatest thing you can do is to foster, a good relationship with the seller. That's the best thing that you can do for any kind of negotiations. And again, it probably goes without saying, but it makes all the difference in the world. Set milestones, continuously qualify them, put things in writing, submit an indication of interest, get it in black and white, get them to respond. Spend as much time with the seller as you can, go to dinner. Take a genuine interest in them as people. Accept the fact that most sellers and most sellers' attorneys don't particularly, at least in this, most smaller businesses don't particularly care what's customary and standard in terms of the terms for deals and so forth. And they may not be familiar with many of them. So that comes with opportunity, but it also comes with some challenges. Deal principal to principal if all possible. Dealing, only with the seller's attorney provides not only noise in the equation or the communication path between you and the seller, but it also puts you at a negotiating disadvantage, roughly akin to dealing with the car salesman who has to go check back with his sales manager. So deal directly with the seller on the business points and let the attorneys hash out the legal details. Finally, be willing to say no and to cut bait when things don't look like they're really going anywhere. And that's very difficult when you're dealing with a fixed time frame and when you've invested a lot of time and effort into a deal. Finally, as to negotiating with financing sources, the quality of the deal dictates to a large degree the success or not that you'll have in negotiating with equity and debt sources, which, again, really gets back to the earlier comments about credibility as well and knowing the space. Keep your investors plugged in along the way. That way you've done kind of most of the heavy lifting in terms of the selling. over the course of the time with which you've been working. If the deal quality is high, clearly you have better subscription and better alternatives and so forth. At the same time, be mindful and aware of the fact that you're negotiating with folks, with whom hopefully you'll be doing business for many more years. So don't try to take the last penny on the table. Don't try to win the battle at all costs. In fact, I wouldn't approach it as a battle. But as with raising the search fund, know what you care about and don't be shy about asking for it. But be aware of what the other side cares about and be open to alternatives.
Thank you, Andy. That's terrific. We're fortunate to have an investor with us to give advice to the would-be entrepreneur from the other side of the table. Lew Davies.
Thanks, sir. I hope you all took notes on what Andy had to say about negotiating with sellers, because he has dealt with some of the worst of the worst. And with 2% of precincts reporting, I think he's coming out golden. But it's he's had some real trials and tribulations along the way. Thanks, Irv, and thanks to all the CES for having me here today. I'll give you a quick overview of the Cambria Group. Cambria was formed in 1996. We have 3 principals, 2 in Menlo Park, 1 in Boston. We each had operating backgrounds before we transitioned into the private equity business, 2 of us with other firms before founding Cambria, and the third came straight to us out of Boston Consulting Group. We do not have a fund. The 3 of us are investing our own capital in these transactions at this point, and hope it remains that way. Our focus is at the lower end of the middle market, what Andy called the micro-cap buyout business. So we think of it as being transactions between $3 and $25 million in enterprise value, but the heart of our strike zone is probably tops out around $15 million. We'll look at service, distribution, and manufacturing businesses. Probably distribution our least favorite among those. We don't do generally healthcare, IT, retail type operations. Over the 11 years, we've closed 14 deals. We've exited 4 of those. And in terms of why we're here, we have made commitments to sort of 6 search funds in a first tranche, as it turned out, not consciously, but it was sort of 6 between a year and 3 years ago. All 6 of those have closed transactions. And then we invested in 3 more in the last 6 months. So we've been in a total of 9, but really only 6 had opportunities to close funds or close acquisitions, and all 6 did. Search funds are clearly not our core business, but we think it's a good complement to our business. We are virtually entirely opportunistic in looking for transactions. We don't do any proactive work studying industries and the like, and we think the search fund for us is a good vehicle to getting into that world of turning over rocks rather than reading memoranda that are put together by business brokers and investment bankers. So in terms of advice for search, I'll start. I was asked to speak about advice for search funders, a little about the entrepreneur's carried interest, and about financing alternatives. In terms of advice for search funders, I would say think about the risks. Search fund studies that have been put out by the CES show a 37% average return, and that's what we see every time someone approaches us, is this is a 37% average return. I think this is actually one of the most misleading statistics you'll ever find. The mean is 37%. The median is negative. I'm sure you've heard that in statistics class. Rarely do you see that big a disparity. And it has real daily real implications for the search funder. It has real implications for us as an investor, but I think candidly even more important implications for the search funder. And candidly, some haven't thought that as much through, I think, as they might. The investor has a chance to participate in 9 search funds, and if a quarter of those don't find a company, we've lost $60,000, $50,000, whatever. 2 people or 4 people didn't find a company, and they spent 2 years of their lives devoted to that. They have to think about that. Then even of the companies that of the funds that have found acquisitions, the results, well, there's a 37% median, as I understand it, roughly a quarter of the 3 quarters that do buy companies, a quarter lose money, a quarter get returns between 0 and 25%, and a quarter get returns over 25%. So that 37% mean return is somewhere out there in the top quartile in terms of just how the actual numbers break out. I think so as a search fund, as someone contemplating a search fund, think about why you are going to represent something closer to the mean than to the median, and whether you really believe it, and then how to sell that. I would also think hard about the question of one versus two person search funds. We have backed 5 one-person search funds, including the 3 most recent, and two-person search funds. We actually believe two-person search funds tend to be a better model. They have better decision-making in that they challenge each other. If you think groupthink is bad with a group of people in the room, it gets really bad when there's one person in the room. And we're big believers within our own firm in a devil's advocate system, and we're constantly challenging each other. There's more depth in the thinking. Sort of people ask each other to probe more deeply. There are different skills. Very often we see a great teaming of someone who's the inside person and the outside person. And then I think Andy can attest, from everyone we've heard, a one-man or one-person search fund can be a very lonely enterprise. There are days when you just need someone to pick you up, and it's helpful to have that person in the next cubicle or next office, whatever that may be. I'd also think hard about the size of the search fund. Clearly, a larger search fund it helps in terms of giving you more runway. It gives you, from our perspective, a fairly big disadvantage, though, in that because of the dilution that will cause when you go out to raise the second round of capital at the time of an acquisition. There's a lot more dilution that's going to be suffered. One of the opportunities that we declined of the search funders who had found a company where we'd backed the search fund and we didn't back the acquisition round, it was because all of the equity that was going to go in the acquisition round was going to get 42% of the upside. There was that much dilution between the seller, the manager, and the search fund round. And when you look at what's the return to the new capital, it got pretty hard to earn a great return on that. I would say if you are thinking about bringing in a partner, find the right partner. From our perspective, what we look for is someone who really wants to run a business. There are some folks who come to talk about doing a search fund where I think we come away not convinced they don't want to be in the private equity business or be chairman of a company as opposed to being CEO of a business, COO, or whatever it ends up being. I can tell you from our experience with Andy and Jim, they are down in the weeds at times, and they are up being CEO and president at times, but you have to be committed to wanting to run a business and dealing with the day-to-day issues, with personnel issues, etc. If you don't want that, don't do a search fund, because that's kind of the holy grail that you're looking for. We look for smart people, entrepreneurial people, someone who's really candid, someone who will tell us that they read the search fund study and they understand the mean is negative and the median is 37%, rather than trying to sell us the 37%. And candidly, we think the search funders can succeed no matter what their background. We've backed people with private equity backgrounds, with consulting, investment banking, military, and people who come out of operations. And I wouldn't say we can correlate success one way with one particular background. So in terms of your finding the right partner, I would look for a lot of those same things personally. I would look for someone who has a complementary skill set. Look for someone who's candid with you, will be able to deliver tough messages to you, and will listen to tough messages that you deliver. You are going to find that there are issues that you need to talk through that are hard. Some of them may have to do with economics. Some of them may have to do with finding a company that really only needs one of you.